Nick here with Game Design Explained, your monthly dose of game design explained in a simple way. In my channel you're also gonna find the latest video game collector's editions, as well as board game first impressions and how to play videos. If you're new to my channel, welcome and consider subscribing so you can receive the latest updates. Today we're gonna be going back into Resident Evil 3, but this time we're gonna be analyzing its AI or artificial intelligence. So we're going to be going through all the archetypes the game has, as well as some other aspects. And we're going to start with perception. In high-level terms, perception on AI means how the AI sees or hears the player, how it keeps track of the player's position and acknowledges the player's impact in the world, when, for example, they leave open doors, they see other killed AIs, or they receive any ambient stimulus. Because of the nature of the game, AIs in Resident Evil have very little realistic perception. This means that they pretty much know where you are all the time, even if they are not looking at you. And what makes them move and attack could be hidden triggers in the level, script calls, or simply by having the player character close to the AI. I will show how this works by doing 3 simple tests. First, check what happens when I shoot next to a zombie. You can see that there is no reaction at all. So there is no bullet whiz or any sort of sound perception for the AI. They don't hear you. The second test was to check proximity and hit triggers. This is a very obvious example. Look at what happens when I cross this imaginary line. See? They instantly knew where I was. There was no detection time or anything like that. Now I will move to the previous area to see what they do. You can see they pretty much followed me even if they could not see my character. This means it's very likely that your position is always updated to the AI, whether you are hiding or not, as they do not stop at your last known position, which should be the place when you turn around the corner. Now let's move to the third test. Pay attention to this sequence. You can see that whenever I move one step back, the zombies immediately go back, completely forgetting that I was there. This feature has multiple names. Defense zones, retreat areas, leashing system, depending on the context that it's used. Among other things, it prevents players from kiting the AI, changing their originally intended location in order to kill them one by one in another area, breaking the level design difficulty. It's also used to make AIs intelligent and dynamic when used in the context of the defense zone and retreat areas. You can find this feature in games like Halo, Metal Gear, or any shooter when fighting living humans. In Resident Evil, it's used more in the context of a leashing system. Level designers can then work on patterns, linking enemies to different areas to make it feel less restrictive. If I rewind the gameplay video of the area I just showed you, you'll be able to notice that there is another zombie there. You can see this zombie is not linked to the same zone and can be easily kited. This is done to make the feature invisible to the player. So yeah, the AI perception in Resident Evil is very simple, and there is a reason for that. You're playing an extremely linear game, very action-based, which the main focus is shooting zombies in the head and solving puzzles. It's not about having some stealth gameplay in there. It's a creative decision that works, and it does not require a more complex perception system. Now that we talked about perception, let's have a look at different types of AIs we have in the game, which we normally call archetypes. An AI archetype in broad terms means an AI that has its own visual, silhouette, behaviors, attacks, and should suggest the player to adapt to their gameplay accordingly. Archetypes are there to challenge the player to approach the combat in a certain way that prompts some players' skills to overcome the challenge, like precision, timing, making tactical choices on which weapons to bring, and so on. So let's analyze some of the game's archetypes to understand what the developers did to make them challenging for the player. Let's start with zombies. They are the bread and butter archetype in the game, but the developers did some clever design to make fighting them interesting and challenging for the player. The first is that there is not only one zombie archetype in the game. Actually, there are multiple of them, but they are not presented as different archetypes to the player. In Resident Evil 3, they want you to see them as the same thing, as a horde, with slightly variations so that the challenge doesn't get mastered right away. So that way an encounter with multiple zombies will still feel slightly different, requiring the player to strategize every time. To prove this, let's start with this zombie here. I'm gonna call it Zombie Archetype A. Forget about the visual, focus just on the elements I will be talking about. Pay attention to how the zombie moves towards the player. Normally, you would say that a zombie moves towards the player on a straight line, but that's not the case. This archetype seems to move more on a parabola, like this. The archetype also maintains the same speed, and very rarely will increase speed for a short amount of time. I believe the reason for that is because this is the most basic zombie archetype in the game, and when they made the zombie move on a straight line, it was very easy for the player to land headshots and kill it. So they added a little bit of precision challenge, as you have to keep aiming as they come towards you. It's also used to create a feeling of flanking whenever multiple zombies are coming towards the player, without having to do any feature that controls a mob of zombies and their positioning, as Resident Evil is about killing a few enemies at a time and not a horde like in Dead Rising or other games out there. Now let's look at this zombie here. I'm gonna call it Zombie Archetype B. Pay attention at its movement. You can see that this one actually moves on a straight line. But why did they do that if you just said that moving on a straight line removes the challenge for players? You can notice that this archetype has its basic animation done so that the head is harder to hit, due to being a little bit twisted. So here they want you to play with precision, but instead of using movement to make you aim at the enemies, they use the animation. So it's another clever and simple way to add challenge without having to code new behaviors. Archetype B also moves in a constant speed due to the aiming difficulty factor, so you have enough time to deal with the challenge. Next, let's analyze Zombie Archetype C. Pay attention to its movement. This archetype still moves on a parabola, but they accelerate their movement from time to time. So the developers play with the movement speed for this archetype, which for the player, when fighting multiple zombies, create a sense of prioritization, because you will try to take this archetype down first, because it can get into melee range faster than other archetypes. They also use another classic archetype, which is the fat zombie. For this one, the challenge is that it has a lot of health if shot in the body. So you really want to hit headshots or pray that you have a lot of ammo left to shoot the body and kill it. So if we place the archetypes side by side, you can see how they cleverly created variation without requiring new behaviors, by simply tweaking the zombie stats and playing with animation poses. Now that we've covered the base zombies, I will talk about two other enemies. But I'm sorry, we're not gonna be talking about Nemesis. The reason is because its AI is not that interesting, and it's mostly scripted. We'll check the pale head zombie and the hunter archetypes, as they have more interesting behaviors to show. The pale head fits more with a traditional archetype than the previous zombie archetypes we've seen. Let's start by looking at its movement. As you can see, he's constantly changing his speed and moving on a zigzag, either towards the player or to some other locations nearby, in order to make hitting them much more difficult. And it wobbles a lot when moving. But his main ability is the fact that he regenerates. You can see that as I'm shooting, they added a VFX that looks like some kind of smoke coming out of his body. This means it's regenerating health, but it's not very clear when you first see it. It regenerates health so fast that it's very hard to kill it with regular guns. The intended strategy to kill it is either using powerful weapons or doing a lucky shot in the head, so it forces the player to make strategical choices on inventory management. And finally, let's analyze the hunter. This enemy is really cool. It's a classical Resident Evil archetype that's very fast, can open doors, and has some self-preservation instincts. Let's see how they did that. My first test was checking how it moves around. So watch this. You can see that as I run around and gain distance, he accelerates to always stay within a good distance from me, as to still be a threat. So this behavior counters the basic player instinct of trying to get distance to shoot, as this may prove difficult to do. Let's see what happens when I cross a room that has a door. Hunters can open doors, which make them a real threat to the player, because it's harder to escape from them. Now let's try shooting it. As you can see, it has some sort of self-preservation behaviors, basically trying to dodge my shots to the right or to the left as it keeps approaching. This makes the fight much more challenging and forces the player to approach this archetype in a different way than the rest of the zombies in the game. In some very specific locations they can also leap on walls, trying to get behind the player, as you can see here. This makes this enemy very different and unique among the other archetypes, as it's the most intelligent enemy you will fight in the game, requiring not only precision and tactical choice towards the weapons you're going to be using, but also reflex whenever they do those fast moves. So to defeat this archetype, you can either A. Use a powerful weapon, especially the shotgun, to take him down as fast as you can, or a grenade with an acid round. B. Use a flashbang to blind it, as it's extremely effective, stunning it for a long period of time, giving you enough time to aim and land some headshots with a shotgun, but you have to be cautious because it can still attack with its claws. C. Deal enough damage as to remove his front shell, like I do here. In this case, the enemy gets stunned and receives more damage when you shoot the head. So during the stun, you can either take the opportunity to run or kill it. But you have to be fast, because once the front shell is removed, the AI becomes much more aggressive. Look at how fast it moves and attacks. The thing with this behavior is that it's very often that you are not gonna see it, because most of the times either you are gonna run from this enemy because it's not worth killing it, or you're gonna use the shotgun and finish it very fast. So the hunter and its low health behavior is a very good example of a design that looks good on paper, but when you put on practice it's not that good. Often when you see low health behaviors on enemies, they only work when the enemy has a lot of health, because the enemy will stay alive for a long period of time, and whenever that ability, the abilities on low health kick in, you're gonna be able to see and experience it and fight it for a long period of time. But the hunters, they die very fast, so it doesn't work really well. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you guys very much for being here and watching this new episode. So if you have any suggestions for the next Game Design Explained episodes, don't forget to write some comments below. Thanks for watching guys, and see you next time.